Imagine waking up in a luxurious castle, surrounded by silk and gold, next to the most powerful woman in the kingdom. You are young, handsome, and she chose you. But when the sun rises, you realize that the chains on your wrists are not decorative, and that metallic smell in the air is not perfume. You have just realized that you have made the fatal mistake of your life, and there is no way out. This is the true story of Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess of Hungary. A woman so powerful that not even kings dared confront her, so beautiful that men sold their souls for a night by her side, and so monstrous that even hell would fear to receive her. In the next few minutes, you will discover why she is considered the greatest female serial killer in history, and why her castle became known as the Palace of Death. Hungary, 1560. Elizabeth is born into one of the richest and noblest families in Eastern Europe. The Báthory family controlled vast expanses of land and had more power than many kings, but the blood that ran in the veins of that family was poisoned. Madness, depravity, and cruelty were traditions passed down from generation to generation, and Elizabeth inherited all of that, multiplied 1,000-fold. Growing up in the 16th century was brutal, but growing up as a Báthory was a nightmare. Elizabeth saw her uncle practice satanic rituals at the age of 7. She witnessed public tortures as if they were family entertainment. Her aunt suffered from epileptic seizures so violent that she needed to be chained, and her brother was known for raping peasant women and then killing them. This was her normality. This was the world that shaped the most dangerous woman in history. At 15, Elizabeth was married to Ferenc Nadasdy, the Black Knight of Hungary, a brutal warrior who earned his reputation by tearing off the noses of Turkish soldiers and sewing them onto neck. He spent years away from home, fighting in endless wars, leaving his young wife alone in a gigantic castle with absolute power over hundreds of servants. It was then that the monster began to awaken. Everything changed on a seemingly normal day. A maid was combing Elizabeth's long black hair when she accidentally pulled a knot too hard. The Countess, in a blind rage, slapped the girl so violently that she broke her nose. Blood gushed out, and some drops fell onto Elizabeth's hand. And then she saw something that obsessed her for the rest of her life. Or at least she believed she saw it. Her skin became younger where the blood had touched. In Elizabeth's disturbed mind, this was a divine revelation. Young blood was the source of eternal youth. She consulted witches and healers who confirmed her delusional beliefs. She studied ancient texts on blood rituals, and she concluded that she needed the blood of virgins. The younger the better. The European aristocracy already used animal blood in cosmetics. Elizabeth simply took it to the most horrific extreme imaginable. The first to arrive were the castle maids. Peasant girls between the ages of 12 and 18, sent by poor families who thought they were giving their daughters a better chance at life. They arrived with hope in their eyes. They would be well fed, have a roof over their heads, and learn trades. But Lactus Castle was not a home. It was a slaughterhouse, and Elizabeth was the butcher. Elizabeth developed a repertoire of horrors that would make any professional executioner vomit. She stuck long needles under the fingernails of her victims, one by one, while making them sing. She used red-hot irons to draw patterns on their skin. She cut the flesh between their fingers with sharp scissors. And always, she collected the blood in silver basins. This wasn't just murder. It was a sick ritual of vanity and power, the most iconic and terrifying image. Elizabeth naked inside an iron bathtub, while maids hung above her, their throats cut, blood falling like crimson rain. Elizabeth washed herself in it, massaged her face with it, drank small sips. She believed that each drop made her more beautiful, younger, more powerful. Her cries of ecstasy mingled with the cries of agony of the victims. The entire castle smelled of iron and death. Elizabeth didn't work alone. She had accomplices who made her killing operation possible. Dorothea Shantis, called Doroka, was the recruiter who traveled through villages promising jobs. Ilona J. prepared the victims with baths and clothes before the ritual. Janos Javeri, known as Fichko, was the muscle who restrained the girls and then disposed of the bodies. And Katalin Benica kept everything organized, like a manager of the apocalypse. In the brutal Hungarian winter, Elizabeth discovered new methods of torture. She made the girls strip naked in the castle courtyard during snowstorms. Then she had ice water thrown on them until their bodies turned into ice statues. Some took hours to die, conscious as they froze alive. Elizabeth watched from the warm window of her chambers, drinking mulled wine. For her, it was just another experiment in her quest for eternal beauty. As the years passed, Elizabeth grew bolder and more reckless. What began as one victim a month became one a week, then several a week. Her castle could no longer hide the bodies. Mass graves were dug on the grounds. Bodies were thrown into nearby rivers. Some were simply left for the wolves in the forests. The smell of decomposition was so strong that peasants avoided passing near the castle. Elizabeth made the mistake that brings down all monsters. She became arrogant. She began recruiting not only peasant girls, but daughters of lesser nobles. Girls who came from wealthy and well-connected families. When these girls began to disappear, questions were asked. Investigations were launched. And unlike the peasant families who had no voice, the nobles had the king's ear. The net was closing in on the countess. A local priest, Reverend Iste and Magyari, could no longer bear the silence. He wrote more than 20 letters to the authorities describing the screams coming from the castle at night. Entire families appeared at his church, weeping, asking about their missing daughters. Mutilated bodies were found on properties near the castle. The evidence was impossible to ignore, but Elizabeth was the Prime Minister's cousin. Who would dare arrest her? On the night of December 30th, 1610, Count Georgi Thurzo mustered enough courage. He was Elizabeth's cousin, but also the king's cousin. He led a group of soldiers in a surprise raid on Lactis Castle. What they found was beyond any nightmare. A dead girl in the main hall, completely drained of blood. Another agonizing, with wounds all over her body. And in the dungeons, dozens of others, in various stages of torture and death. The investigators cataloged every horror. They found more than 50 bodies in different stages of decomposition hidden throughout the castle. Instruments of torture covered entire walls, cages with spikes, branding irons, whips with metal tips. Detailed diaries where Elizabeth recorded each victim, and testimonies from survivors who managed to escape. The numbers were impossible to confirm, but estimates ranged from 300 to 650 victims over decades. Here's the most revolting part. Elizabeth was never tried. Her aristocratic position protected her even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Her accomplices were tortured, confessed everything, and were brutally executed. Dorka and Ilona had their fingers ripped off with red-hot pincers before being burned alive. Fichko was beheaded. But Elizabeth was too noble to be touched by common justice. The law had double standards. The solution they found was to imprison Elizabeth inside her own castle. Literally. Masons bricked up the windows and doors of her chambers, leaving only a small opening for food to pass through. She was walled up alive. She spent the last 4 years of her life in almost total darkness, in a room that slowly transformed into her tomb. No mirrors, no beauty, no youth. Only the echo of her own screams reflected on the walls. Elizabeth Báthory died on August 21st, 1614, at the age of 54. Her body was buried in secret to prevent the tomb from being desecrated. But her legacy survives to this day. She has inspired countless vampire stories and blood legends. Her castle still stands in Slovakia, attracting morbid tourists. And her story reminds us of something terrifying. The real monsters don't have fangs or claws. They wear crowns, live in palaces, and society protects them until it's too late.